Write it down.
Okay, and we're off. So story of the week, since we've been very shvach on the story of the week for a while. So I'm working Bezrat Hashem on a project in the project in the army that we'll be able to talk about hopefully soon. And someone who volunteered to help with that is an officer, lives in Modi'in, older guy, probably is like mid 40s. I'm schmoozing with him and like, okay, yeah, what's your job? Like, what's your regular job in the army? Like, what do you do when you're and he said, I teach at Bislach. Bislach is the squad commander school. So at any given time, there's 4 battalions of squad commander school cadets on Bislach. I think it's 4. I'm pretty sure it's 4. And in regular time, they're doing the course. But if there's a war, they all go to fight. It's the same thing with officers training school. They're in this course, but if there's a war, they all stop the course and they all go. That's how it works. I'm chatting with him. He said, "Yeah, what battalion were you in?" He said, "Yeah, 450. Okay, very interesting. Where were you during the war?" "I was in Rafah." And then he said, "Were you guys in Rafah like a year and a half ago?" I said, "Yeah, that was." I said, "Were you guys at the Sinwar thing?" He said, "We weren't at the Sinwar thing. We did the Sinwar thing." So it was him and his Talmidim took out Sinwar. It was like him and his 18-year-old Talmidim were the guys that took out Sinwar. Unbelievable. It's a small world. So, yeah. It's incredible, the convergence of interesting personalities that come about once in a while. Tov. So we're gonna jump right in. I'm reading from Rambam Chomes Umatzah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Aleph. Mitzvahs Asay Shel Torah is a positive commandment in the Torah. L'saper b'nisim b'niflo shenasu la'avoseinu b'mitzrayim b'leil chamisha asar b'nisan. To speak of the miracles and supernatural events that took place to the Jewish people on the 15th of Nisan. Shenamar Zechoras Hayom Hazeh Asher Yisasam Mitzrayim. Remember this day in which you went out of Mitzrayim. Kilo Shenamar Zechoras Yom HaShabbos. In the same manner that there's a mitzvah to remember Shabbos, which is to verbally enunciate, to verbally declare the sanctity of Shabbos and why Shabbos is important. So too, when we're commanded to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, it doesn't just mean to recall it cognitively, but it means to speak it out. How do we know that has to be on Dafka that day, the 15th of Nisan? As it says, you will tell your child on that day. Ba'avur zeh, meaning because of these mitzvos. That's the context of that pasuk in Shemos Yud Beis, that because of these mitzvos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, meaning zeh, referring to the mitzvos that are in front of you. V'af al pi she'ein lo ben, even if a person isn't speaking to his actual child, but you're speaking it out in the context of having these mitzvahs in front of you. Afilu chachamim gedolim chayavim l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. And the mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim is on even great, wise people that already know about the story. Meaning, what it's saying is that the telling over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is not in order so that people should know the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. They don't know, and now they know. That's not the reason. Obviously, that's for sure an important thing. If people don't know, to tell them about it, right? People need to be aware. We need to be aware of our history, but that's across the board. People need to be aware of Jewish history. But this specific mitzvah is not a practical utilitarian. People don't know, so tell them about it. And therefore, even if people already know. They already know the details of Yetzias Mitzrayim backwards and forwards. There's still a mitzvah to speak about it. And anyone who expands upon the telling of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the more the better. When looking at the process of the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, what is very, very probably the single most constant theme, I think that's fair to say, from the beginning of the story until the end, is the lack of participation of the Jewish people. Jewish people don't really have so much to do until the very end, where they're commanded to engage in the mitzvos of Leil HaPesach. But before that, they're very, very passive. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu has most of his interactions are with Paro and the Paro cohorts, but there is an interaction with the Jewish people in the very, very beginning. And that interaction is clearly not positive. It clearly didn't go how it was supposed to. And then that's it. It's kind of, just trails off and the story moves on. In the very beginning of Parshas Va'era, so Moshe is told by Hashem to go and communicate a certain message to the Jewish people. Vayidaber Elohim el Moshe vayomer elav ani Hashem vayirel Avraham ve'el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov ve'el Shaddai u'shmi Adonai lo nudati lahem v'gam hakimosi es brisi sam laseis lahem es eretz Canaan. I established with the Avos a covenant that I would give them the land of Canaan. V'gam ani shamati es na'akas b'nei Yisrael asher Mitzrayim avidim l'sam ve'ez kores brisi. And now I have heard the suffering of the Jewish people, and I have remembered my covenant. Which covenant? The one that I made with the Avos, that I would give them the land of Canaan. That's basically what for the purposes of this conversation, that is the main message that Moshe is giving the people. He called, right? Vayidaber Moshe Kain el bnei Yisrael. Right? Moshe gives over this message to the Jewish people. V'lo shamu el Moshe mikotze ruach ma'avodah kasha. This is very, very strange. This is very, very strange. Moshe is telling the people, he shows up and he tells them that, listen, I see that you're having a rough time and I made a promise to the Avos that I would save you and I'm here to save you. And they didn't hear because they were so depressed and downtrodden that they couldn't hear. Adarabba, on the contrary, if a person is downtrodden and depressed, that they're having a difficult situation, and someone comes and tells them, I'm here to save you, because I promised that I would save you, that should take them out of the Kotzer Ruach Ma'avodah Kasha. Indeed, we find a retelling of this story. It's very, very important. I say this every opportunity that we get. The most important commentary on Kisvei HaKodesh is the Kisvei HaKodesh by far. There's no question. The problem is that we very often isolate our readings of Kisvei HaKodesh, and then it's very hard to litmakem. It's very hard to place ourselves in the proper context. It's a very, very big problem. But if we just go through the words, very often things clarify when we gain more information. And we're going to learn an example of this right now. So we have this interaction of Moshe with the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. He comes to them. Again, it's basically the only interaction that Moshe has, certainly in the beginning, right, until the very, very end when they actually leave. It's the only interaction that they have. It's a very strange interaction. So in Sefer Yechezkel, in the opening of Perek Chaf, so Yechezkel gives a rundown of Jewish history from Yetzias Mitzrayim until that moment in time. We're not going to do the whole rundown because it's not relevant to our topic, but just listen how Yechezkel describes the initial interaction between Hashem and the Jewish people. V'amarta aleim, go and tell the elders of Yehuda as follows. On the day that I chose the Jewish people, and I made myself known to them in the land of Egypt. I told them, Nasasi es yadi. It doesn't just mean in the context. It doesn't just mean to swear or to make a commitment, but it means that you're ready to go. It's kind of implied in the terminology. Nasasi yadi. I'm raising my hand, meaning I'm ready to take action. So I'm ready to take them out of Mitzrayim. El eretz asher tarti lahem zavas chalav u'devash. Va'amar alehem. And what did I tell them? What did I tell them at that moment, when the day that I decided to take them out of Mitzrayim? Ish shikutzei einav hashlichu. The abominations of your eyes, get rid of. Uvegilulei Mitzrayim al titamo. And in the idolatry of Egypt, do not contaminate yourselves. Ani Adonai Elohechem. That was the message. That was the initial message that he gave the Jewish people. Vayomru bi. And they rebelled against me. V'lo avu lishmo elai. And they did not want to listen to me. Ish es shikutzei einaim lo ishlichu. The abominations of their eyes they did not get rid of. As Gilulei Mitzrayim lo azavu. And the pagan idols of Egypt they did not leave behind. And at that moment I said, that's it, I had it with these people, I'm just going to destroy them. However, I didn't do that. In order so that my name would not be Hechel, would not be, what's the word I'm looking for, please? Would not be desecrated. Thank you. Would not be desecrated. Leinei Agoyim, in the eyes of the nations. Asher Hema b'Silcham, that they dwell among them. Asher Nodati Aleim Leineim Lotziam Me'eretz Mitzrayim, because I was meant to take them out before the eyes of Egypt, before the eyes of all the nations. This is a very, very big theme that I think we've come across in other contexts in Sefer Yechezkel. Sefer Yechezkel is very, very hard in this message throughout all the many prakim of Sefer Yechezkel, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides how he's going to deal with the Jewish people for the sake of his name. That's the main consideration. It's not just because he loves the Jewish people, it's not just because he has a covenant with the Avos, but because his name is inextricably bound with the fate of the Jewish people. And this is the very first interaction the Jewish people have with God, as a nation at least, and they're not coming through, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, despite the fact that they're not coming through, I have to help them out for the sake of my name. This interaction, this description of the story gives us profound insight as to what's going on. Moshe Rabbeinu isn't simply going to the Jewish people and telling them the good news, giving them the Basara Tova, that he's here to take them out of Mitzrayim. He's telling them that there are strings attached to this whole Yetzias Mitzrayim thing. He's saying, we're going through a paradigm shift now. All right? Until now, it was you're slaves, you're a slave nation in Egypt, and now I'm taking you out, and there's the Am HaNivchar program. And that has certain requirements. And the requirements are, you gotta leave behind where you are. You gotta let it go. You have to let all of that go. And when it says, V'lo shamu el Moshe, that they didn't listen, meaning they didn't follow the instructions. Listen. Lo shamu, they didn't follow the instructions. Because of how downtrodden they were. They weren't able to receive that message, that it's time to shift from slave nation mentality to Am HaNivchar mentality. That they weren't able to hear. Indeed, this idea of how central the leaving behind of the paradigm known as Avodah Zarah, foreign worship, as Chazal call it, even though that term isn't really in Kisvei HaKodesh, but this worldview, the paradigm of Avodah Zarah, leaving that behind and transferring to a new paradigm, is at the bedrock of what's going on in Yetzias Mitzrayim. I'll read a section from the Mechilta, on Shmos Yud Bey's Pasuk Vav. Mishchu k'chu lachem Pesach. Right, mishchu, to pull, like the type of acquisition, mashicha, when you acquire an animal so you can lead it by the reins, you're pulling it, mishchu. So take the animal, mishchu yedechem, right, mishchu k'chu lachem. Excuse me. Says the Mechilta. What is the deeper understanding of this mishchu, of this imperative to take an animal for the Korban Pesach? Mishchu yedechem me'avodah zarah v'hidabku b'mitzvos. Remove your hands from idolatry and instead cleave on to the commandments. Rabbi Yehuda ben Desera commented on this. We learned a few chapters earlier. This is we're in chapter 12. Right, we're in Pagan days. This is Parak Vav. Okay, all the way back 6 chapters ago. Have you ever heard of someone who receives good news and he's not happy because of the good news? Moshe is literally there telling them, I'm coming to save you. I'm coming to save you. And they're just, they're moping around. Right? You just had a baby boy, or you're being saved by your master. How could it be that they're not happy? It was so difficult in their eyes, the thought of removing themselves from idolatry. The pasuk from Yechezkel that we just read. This is what's going on in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The participation of the Jewish people in the context of Yetzias Mitzrayim the active role the Jewish people were meant to have was to say that we're ready to leave Mitzrayim in a paradigmatic sense. We're willing to leave behind everything that's going on here. And this is not, we're all familiar with the famous midrash of, the 4 things that the Jewish people kept that made them unique. As we read in the Agada. It's a machlokas in the different forms of the Midrash, what exactly the things were, but be that as it may. The point of that Midrash is to say that despite the fact that the Jewish people were completely ensconced in Egyptian culture, and literally pagans, in the same way that the Egyptians were pagans, at least they had these things that they kept. That's the point of that Midrash. And indeed, Chazal say that at the point of the of Kriyas Yamsuf, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was in the process of saving the people and submerging the Egyptian army, the Malachim turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and they say, Halalu Ovdei Kochavim, V'halalu Ovdei Kochavim. These are idolaters and these are idolaters. Why are you saving these and destroying these? What's the difference? The Malachim, meaning the idea that when there's a dialogue, any dialogue between the Malachim and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what that means is the highest level of perception and grasp versus the divine perception and grasp. The Malachim are representing, they're embodying the highest possible perception of reality, beyond human perception, even beyond human perception. And that level of perception could not tell the difference between the Jewish people and Mitzrayim. And it was only HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was able to say, no, there is a difference. And what's the difference? Ba'as l'man shemi. That's the difference. The difference is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had determined that his name, the fate of his name as it is represented in the world, became inextricably bound with these people. So he had to save them. When we approach the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, there's a very, very powerful and explicit link between the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which was a moment in time on the 15th of Nissan, the night of the 15th of Nissan, and the month of Nissan itself. Ad kidei kach, there's a hava amina that the mitzvah of telling over Yetzias Mitzrayim should start already now. Should start already now from Rosh Chodesh, because there's something about this month. This month is unique in that we're already in Yetzias Mitzrayim mode. What is that mode that begins now? That begins now already, Me Rosh Chodesh. That there's a Havamina that we should be saying Yetzias Mitzrayim already now. We should be telling over the advent of Yetzias Mitzrayim already from Rosh Chodesh. It is this Nakuda. It is this Nakuda, the shift from the paradigm of Avodah Zarah to the paradigm of Torah. And what is that central, what represents, or embodies rather, that paradigm shift? It is the first mitzvah that the Jewish people receive. It's the mitzvah that the people receive on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. You read from a section from the from the Midrash Rabbah on Shemos Tesvav. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Haduhu Dichsiv. This is what it says in the pasuk in Mishlei in Parakeh. Yehiyu lecha levadecha. It will be for you alone. Ve'ein lizorim itach. And there will be no foreigners with you. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eini mazir ovdei kochavim al avodas kochavim. I don't waste my time trying to warn the idolaters about not doing idolatry. Ela lochem. However, to you, I do warn you about idolatry. Shenemar lo tasu lochem elilim. You should not have for you these little gods. What does the word elilim mean, by the way? In Lashon HaKodesh, you have this formulation of words that when the main consonant is doubled, it connotates that the thing is small. For example, how do you say flower pot in Hebrew? Atzitz. Atzitz is a pot that you plant something in. Why do you call it an atzitz? Because there's an eitz, which is a big normal-sized tree, and there's an atzitz, which is a small tree. Right? You grow a tree in a pot, it's not going to become a big tree. Right? Atzitz. So there is an El. El means God, right? And Elil means a little God. Ki kol Elohei ha'amim elilim. The gods of the nations are little gods. Not big like 5'7" as opposed to 6'4", but little in their content, in their character. They're little, right? They're little. They're existentially small, right? How is it that the concept of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem is embodying the shift from Avodah Zarah to the Torah's worldview? So let's start off with the worldview of the pagan, the worldview of Avodah Zarah. So the Rambam writes in the opening chapter of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, This is, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only section in the Yad where the Rambam gives a historical introduction to the background of the halachos that he's about to say. You could say maybe in Hilchos Chanukah he also, but he's giving over the story, Kilo. But how ideologically these halachos came about, I think, is unique to this section. So he says, "Bimei enosh," in the days. Which one? Sorry. Hilchos Ishos. You're saying like the difference between before and after Matan Torah. Okay. Kibalti. Fine. We can also consider that one. Okay. I guess that counts. I mean, here there's like a whole story about it. Fine. Okay. We'll give Elkin his due. Yishar Koach. So what's the whole story? Bimei Enosh, in the days of Enosh, right, the descendant of Avram, right, a few generations after Avram, Tohu ha'olam to'us gedola. There was a huge mistake that all of humanity made simultaneously. And what was the major mistake that humanity made? They made the following calculation. Because God clearly wants to give honor to all of the celestial bodies and all of the forces of nature that He created. The forces of nature are very powerful, right? We see the planets that are moving around in the heavens. The sun rises every morning. The moon is going through its cycles all the time, right? The seasons carry with it different powers and different energies. Clearly, these are very important. They have massive impact on the world. And therefore, we should be giving them kavod. We should be giving them honor. In the same way that you give honor to the king by respecting the king's emissary, similarly, we should be giving honor to the king, i.e. God, through giving honor to his emissary. You should know that this idea is a very, very important idea. The Gemara in Baba Kama and Daf Kuf Yud Beis, if I'm not mistaken, talks about the idea of giving kavod to a shliach bezdin. A shliach bezdin is believed without Eidim. He can come to Bezdin and say, I went to deliver this guy a message, and he slammed the door in my face and didn't listen. And on the basis of that, Bezdin can punish such a person based on that. Giving respect to a representative of authority is a real thing. Definitely, 100%. Okay, so that's a nice consideration. So they decided they're going to build systems around giving kavod to these forces of nature that God put into existence. That's how it started, right? And says the Rambam, no one for a moment at that point in time was going to assert that there was no creator, that there was no all-encompassing divine being that brought the world into being and created all these things. No one was thinking that at that point. But that was the fatal error. The fatal error was, let's devote our time and energy and spiritual focus on giving honor to these forces which God put into the world. And then eventually, im hazman, right, with time, as time elapsed, this kavod, right, this ritualized giving honor to forces of nature turned into a whole system, which we call paganism today. It turned into the pagan system, right? The Rambam says, right? They would start building these massive towers and these massive temples to the forces of nature, and then things got completely out of control until the point that people completely forgot about the Creator, and they were only engaged in this ritualized worship of forces of nature. What the Rambam is telling us is a very, very, very deep and profound lesson about the razor-thin line between proper avodas Hashem and what can descend down the slope of paganism. It is indeed true that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created all these forces of nature in order so that we can interact with them, in order so that we can experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu through them. Indeed, all of the Tehillim of Psukei de Zimra that we all say every morning, the main focus of these Psukim is to appreciate the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is impacting us through forces of nature. That is what it is. In fact, there are many Mefarshim, Rashi included, and the Gemara in Shabbos says that every day a person should say the Hallel, right? A person should say this miniaturized Hallel that's referring to the third to last parak of Tehillim, fourth to last parak of Tehillim, Hallelu es Hashem min hashamayim, listing all of the ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifests through the heavens and through the earth, through the animals and through the stars and through all the natural phenomena. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created these things in order to be able to have an interaction with us. However, there is a very, very thin line between appreciating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's interaction with us through these things and worshiping the things themselves. That is the pagan worldview. And then what happens? What's the worldview switch when a person begins worshiping forces of nature? When a person begins worshiping forces of nature, he has the tfisa, the grasp of reality, that the system is what it is. It's a closed system. It could be a very complex system, a very beautiful system, just like a Swiss watch with 10,000 moving parts. It's a beautiful, but it's closed. Nothing changes in this system. In fact, if something changes in a complex system, it breaks. If one of those little small pieces in the watch gets a little bit out of place, the whole thing collapses. You don't want any change in a complex closed system. You want it to be closed and fixed and unmovable all the time, immutable. The chidush of the Torah is, the very foundations of the Torah is that there is a phenomenon called chodesh. That there is this thing called newness. What does that mean, newness? It means agency. Agency. It means that there was a creator that decided he wants to create the world. Where did that come from? It didn't come from anything. It came from nothing. And where does this find us in our experience of reality? Obviously, we're not creating worlds, although we are creating worlds. We just don't realize it. But where does this the beginnings of this manifestation in our consciousness? Where does this come? In what we call free will, bechira. There's all this conversation. Please forgive me for speaking in such a blunt fashion. I really believe all these conversations about the nature of free will and where does it come from. I think it's frankly, it's a waste of time. Because trying to explain the nature of free will is contradictory to the Torah's assertion of what free will is. The best way that I've heard free will explained is how Rabbi Nachman explained free will. When Rav Nosson asked him, explain free will. And Rabbi Nachman thought about it for a minute, or he thought about it for a while. He started thinking, so going back and forth. Then he opens his eyes and he says, free will means that if you want to do something, then you do it. And if you don't want to, you don't. That's what it means. And what that means, perush al perusho, what that means is that it doesn't come from anything. You created it. You created it. Ex nihilo. It didn't exist. That decision did not exist a moment ago. And then you made the decision and then it existed. That's the chadash. It's chadash. The assertion, the logical conclusion, even if people are sometimes uncomfortable saying it, there are unfortunately people that are comfortable with saying it, but the logical conclusion of such a worldview is that there's no innovation. There's nothing new. There is no you. There's no you because you're just the sum total of your experiences. Your outputs are just the sum total of your inputs. If that's true, there is no you. There's nothing there. It's just the billiard balls on the table moving around endlessly in this complex system. Again, a beautiful system, a beautiful, magnificent system, colorful, complex, amazing, but it's a closed system. And the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is the assertion that there is newness here, in contrast to what? In the contrast to the other way of calculating time. What are the two main bodies of time that we use in order to calculate the calendar? The Chodesh and the Shana. These two things mean the exact opposite of each other. How do they mean the exact opposite? Chodesh means new. Shana means to repeat. Vishinantam levonecha. Vishinantam levonecha. You will repeat it over and over and over again. A Shana this year is the same as last year, and it's going to be the same as next year, and 100 years from now. It's the same thing. It just goes over and over and over again. But the Chodesh is the newness component. The newness. I heard this from Moshe Shapiro many years ago. This is something that I actually heard him say. Chazal talk about the idea of the Sod Ha'ibur. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that we also learn in context. It's part of this mitzvah. Part of this mitzvah of calculating the month is to make the proper calculations in order to make sure that the solar calendar and the lunar calendar stay somewhat in sync. We learn that from the pasuk in Sefer Devarim, Shmor es Chodesh HaAviv. You should guard the month of the Aviv. The Aviv is an astronomical phenomenon. Okay, that when that appears in the sky, it's the coming of the spring. Right? That's the indication that spring is coming, this particular astronomical sign. So when the Torah says, Shmor es Chodesh HaAviv, you should guard this month, it means that make sure that the Aviv coincides with Pesach. Right? If we didn't have these calculations, very, very quickly, the months would go out of sync. Right? Because the lunar month, 12 lunar cycles, comes out to 354 days. The solar calendar is 365 days. So if you lose 11 days every year, very, very quickly, Pesach is coming out in the winter. Very quickly. Right? There's another system, okay, that has a strictly lunar system, and they don't care about remaining in line, which is why their things sometimes fall out in February, and the next thing you know, it's falling out in June, and that's their system. But the mitzvah, part of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, is to make sure that these things are in sync. So says Rav Moshe Shapiro, why is it that this is called the Sod Ha'ibor, the secret? What's the secret? So at the simple understanding, you could say, well, to make these calculations is actually quite hard. It's very complex, very complex. Right? The Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh of the Rambam, you see these, it's quite complex calculations. It's hard to follow. You could say, okay, that's the secret. The secret is that it's hard calculations. But the panemius of this Sod, of this secret, is that the Ibor, making these calculations to make sure that the lunar and the solar are constantly in sync. The secret there is that the Chodesh component, the newness, the spiritual, existential agency that we have as from Tselem Elokim, that component will remain in sync with the Shana, with the natural world that has been put into place. That there should be an integration of those two things. That is the Sod, and that's a big secret. Because not everyone could pull that off. Not everyone, and not everyone knows how to do that. Not everyone knows how to maintain the integration between the Chadash and the Shana. That is the Sod Ha'ibor. And that is the mandate the Jewish people are receiving. They're being told, you have to leave behind this paradigm, the paradigm of the closed system of the pagan, he worships the system. The pagan is worshiping the system. You gotta leave that paradigm behind. However, part and parcel of the Chodesh Hazeh Lachem is to make sure that we maintain some type of integration with this system. Because in the end of the day, the system was also created by Hashem. It wasn't a mistake that the system was created. On the contrary, the system was created in order so that we could experience HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the phenomenon of the system. But we can only do that. The paradox of that is that we can only do that, we can only maintain that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the system if we understand that the system isn't real to the fullest extent that we experience it. There's something beyond that system. As the Maharal says so beautifully in Perek Nun Zayin of Sefer Gvuras Hashem, he explains how the Makos, each one of the plagues parallels one of the Ma'amaros of Ma'aseh Bereishis, one of the utterances of creation. Because each one of the Makos was peeling away one of the layers of the natural world. So says the Maharal, if you're peeling away layers, which layer do you start with? You start with the last layer, right? The most external layer. Which means that the last of the Makos parallels the first of the Ma'amaros of creation. You have to go through the whole thing, but just to give you a sense of how unbelievably it lines up. The last Makkah is Makos Bechoros. What is the first Ma'amar of Ma'aseh Bereishis? Bereishis, the first, right? The Bechor is the first, and it's going against, it's uprooting the phenomenon of Bereishis. What was the second Ma'amar of Ma'aseh Bereishis? Vayehi Or. And what's the second to last of the Makos? Choshech. It's undoing Ma'aseh Bereishis, not undoing in order to destroy it, undoing in order to peel the layers back and show this isn't the end all of that it appears. It's not this steady state, constant thing that you apprehend. There's something behind this. There's a mover and a controller and a creator behind all of this. How we can take this to heart in general, and especially in light of our current moment. What did he say the code was? 8217. I'm going to read a section too from the Yalkut Shimoni in Sefer Shmuel. Yalkut Shimoni says, Arba Malachim Hayu. Says the Midrash. It's also brought in the Midrash Rabbah on Eicha, by the way, in the Pticha. Arba Malachim, Masha Tavazeh Lo Tavazeh. There were 4 kings, and what this one asked, that one didn't ask. The Elohim. These are the 4 kings: David, Asa, Yehoshaphat, and Chizkiyahu. These are the 4 kings. David Omar Erdof Oivai Asigem. I will chase my enemies down and I will grab them. The continuation of the pasuk is V'lo Ashuv Ad Chalosam, and I will not return until they are destroyed. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani osakein, shenemar veichas David ma'aneshav yad ha'erev. And God said, great, that's what I'm going to do. As it says in the Pasuk in Sefer Shmuel, when David is chasing down the Amalekite horde that kidnapped his family and kidnapped the family of all of his followers and stole all their stuff, he chased them down and he smote them from the morning until the evening. Amad Asa ve'Amar, Asa, his descendant, stood up and said, Indi koach la'arog. I don't have the strength to fight. Ela ani rodef ve'ata osa. All I can do is chase down the enemy, but I can't actually destroy them. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu ani osakein. Fine, so I'll do it for you. Shenemar vayidefem Asa v'ha'ama sherimo. Asa, the battle that he fights, he chases them down, and God finishes off the war without actual any combat on the part of Asa. Amad Yehoshaphat ve'Amar, Ein bi koach lo la'arog v'lo lirdof. I don't even have any koach to chase. Right? Ela hareini omer shira. All I can do is sit and daven. V'ata osa. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu ani osakein. Fine, so if that's what you want, then I'll do that. Amar Chizkiyo stood up. The Amar, Ein bi koach lo la'arog. I can't fight. V'lo lirdof. I can't chase. V'lo lo marshira. I can't even pray. Ela hareini yoshon b'mitasi v'ata osa. I'm going to lay down and go to sleep, and you're going to do what you're going to do. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu ani osakein. Fine, if that's what you want, that's what I'll do. As it says in the pasuk that we all are familiar with in Malach and Beis, Vayetzi Malach Hashem Vayachim Machane Ashur. When the Assyrian army was surrounding Yerushalayim in the middle of the night, God came, wipes out the entire army while everyone's asleep. There's a deep, profound secret that is being told to us in this midrash. David HaMelech is the ideal of what it looks like to have an interaction with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. David HaMelech said to Hashem, I want to do everything. I'm going to get up, I'm going to chase, I'm going to fight, I'm going to do whatever I can. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, that's what you want to do. Yalla, let's go do it. With the Yeridas Hadoros, Rabosai, with the degradation of the generations, we can say such things about these great tzaddikim that we learn things from. Asa, Yehoshaphat, Chizkiyo. Chizkiyo says it was the greatest king in some ways more than David HaMelech, as is the pshat of the psukim in the Torah. But with the devolution, at least in this aspect, there was a withdrawal. A withdrawal from engaging, because we can't. I don't have any strength. I don't have the strength to fire. I don't have the strength to chase. I don't have the strength to do anything. I don't have the strength to pray. I was like, any interaction, there's always going to be an intermediary between us and the reality that we engage with. There's always going to be an intermediary. The intermediary can be seen as an interface with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the intermediary can be worshipped as Avodah Zarah. It's all a question of perception. And with the ideal, the worldview of a David HaMelech, which is the consciousness of Mashiach, as the pasuk in Sefer Cheskel says, "V'David Avdi Yimloch Aleim." That's the ideal. The ideal is that the person with the consciousness of David will bring about the final redemption. The ideal there is to be able to have full engagement with reality, with the world, and know with absolute clarity and certainty that this is just an interface with the Creator. That's what it is. It's all an interface with the Creator. I remember I had a difficult conversation with a very, very unique Talmid Chacham in Yerushalayim. We were talking about the war and the things going on in the current moment, and he said, "You should know that in the times of old in Yemei Kedem, the Jewish people fought with the Shemos. They didn't actually have to fight. They just uttered the names of God, and that handled everything." He said even the Hashmonayim fought with the Shemos. So rather than addressing whether or not that's true, I don't care if that's true or not. Frankly, I don't care if that's true or if it's not true. My response to such an idea is that I don't care what I fight with. I don't care if I'm fighting with the Shemos. I don't care if I'm fighting with a spear. I don't care if I'm fighting with a tank. The whole point is that it's an interface with the Creator. Everything is an interface with the Creator. It doesn't matter if it's the spiritual incantations of different variations of God's name, and it doesn't matter if it's a Reaper drone. Doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter. The Shemos and the Reaper drone are the same thing. For me, personally, it's the same thing. It's all an interaction with the Creator. And this is the consciousness of David HaMelech that we are trying to inculcate. And it was the consciousness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying so desperately to give the Jewish people of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, with the Sod HaIbor. Making sure that we know with absolute perfect clarity that all of the layers of reality can be peeled back so that we can see who's behind that reality, and at the same time making sure that we are fully and thoroughly engaged with that reality which we were put in. Going back to the Rambam, with this I promise we'll finish off. The Rambam that we opened up with. The mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of Lesaper b'maaseh Yetzias Mitzrayim, is not to give over the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Lesaper b'nisim v'niflos shenasu l'avosenu b'Mitzrayim. To emphasize the fact that this was a supernatural event. It wasn't that there was a nation of slaves and then they were free. You can walk away with that. You could say, yeah, it's a nice theme of freedom, and enslaving people isn't nice, and God helped them, and great. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying that's not the full message of the story. The message of the story was this was a supernatural event that HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervened in order to make this happen. That's the message of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's the message. And Chodesh Nisan is already, it's getting us into the mindset and the modality, the paradigm that the Torah wants us to be able to interact with. Bezrat Hashem.